People suck, people suck, people suck. I don't like y'all. People suck, people suck, people suck.
Hello, everyone. This is Jason Rowe, Executive Director of the Michigan Republican Party, welcoming you to the third Grand Old podcast. What day is it? What week are we in? The second week of May, staring at the first Republican State Committee meeting of 2021 this Saturday. Before we get started, let's introduce the crowd. First, we've got Ted Goodman, Communications Director.
Hi, Jason.
Meshawn, Maddock, Co-Chair.
Hey, Jason.
Paul Cordes, Chief of Staff.
Hi, Meshawn.
Andrea, Pollock, our Political Director.
I'm clearly the smartest in the room.
And our External Affairs Director, Sarah Anderson.
Hi there.
Hello.
To everybody, not just one of you, all of you.
Well, I guess the big news for the upcoming week, without looking at this past week, is President Biden is coming to Michigan. Who wants to talk about his visit and what's planned?
Sure. So President Biden will be making his first presidential visit to Metro Detroit next week. He'll be in Dearborn to tour the Ford Rouge Electric Vehicle Center. And this is interesting. So this tour is happening on Tuesday, the 18th. And it's just right before Ford's about to unveil this new all-electric F-150 Lightning. So great. The president obviously wants to come in with this big good news. And what he probably won't talk about is the April jobs report. The report showed that Joe Biden is squandering the economic recovery that he inherited from the former president and the Republican Congress. The unemployment rate rose in April for the first time during the recovery to 6.1%. And so really it's interesting, right? The Democrats under Governor Whitmer and President Biden are squandering our recovery. They're slowing it down. And nearly everything they've done has not had the American worker in mind. It's all been about what they can get out of this. It's all about big government regulations, how they have all the solutions, and they really don't trust the people of Michigan and this country to bounce back bigger and better than ever before. These lockdown policies have just hurt the American worker, and that's very clear.
It's also interesting that he is choosing to tour a car truck manufacturer when how many of those operations here in Michigan are shut down right now because of chip shortages. How many vehicles are sitting waiting for these chips because of our dependence on other nations.
China.
And it'd be interesting if the press pushed him on that. I haven't really seen that narrative being pushed that much. My mom works in a factory that produces parts for GM, and there are no weekend hours, no work on Friday, and they're lucky that that's as much as they're being cut off right now. You drive by car dealerships, their parking lots are empty. They can't get vehicles in to sell because of these shortages of parts that they need. I think Michigan State is housing hundreds of half-done cars waiting on these parts.
Wow.
So that's something I think needs to be pushed more. I think the press needs to push him on that. What are you doing to help solve this issue looking forward? It's great that we're going to move to electric vehicles. Fantastic. But
Especially with the price of gas under the Biden administration.
how do we
If you
fix
can find
this
it.
problem and get Michiganders back to work, especially when the auto industry is what drives Michigan?
Well, and that's an important point. The chip thing, I don't think it's getting the attention that it deserves because this is affecting the auto industry, not just the American manufacturers, but around the world, because apparently there's only 2 plants in the world that produce these chips. One, I believe, in China, the other one in Japan, and the one in Japan had a fire and burned down. And from talking to someone in the auto industry, it could take 3 years to get a new plant stood up and running. And so this is going to be a long-term drag, especially on the Michigan economy because of the dependence on the auto industry that you referenced. And I haven't heard anything coming out of the administration about this. And this is a big, big issue. And
Or
it
from the
affects,
governor, for that matter.
And that's something I think we should make sure the media focuses on when the president is here. I'm sure Governor
One of the
Whitmer.
representatives, I can't remember her name, it was a woman last week, was talking about over 1 million vehicles sitting in lots across the state of Michigan, and it's completely being ignored. Nobody in the media is talking about those vehicles.
Another thing about Biden that was pointed out to me by one of our state senators, there was a viral picture of the Biden's visiting with former President Jimmy Carter and his wife. And I think some of the advice that the sitting president got from former President Carter, you can see how it's played out. Those of you that were alive in the 70s, not you, Ted, we are seeing Carter-like inflation, Carter-like gas lines, and Carter-like conflicts in the Middle East. So we're not getting the third Obama term here. We're getting the second Carter term.
My favorite part of that, if I'm being honest, was the picture, how it looked like.
They were midgets.
Yeah, it looked like. Have you ever seen the movie Elf?
Yes.
You know how Will Ferrell is like the giant in the North Pole? It was bizarre. It had to have been a camera angle.
It was Photoshopped.
Something.
It was
But
completely
I
creepy.
could not stop looking at the photo.
Conspiracy theory photo.
I don't even know that it's a conspiracy. Like bad camera angles make weird things like that happen, but it amused me to no end. Elf is one of my favorite movies, so anytime I can bring in Will Ferrell to a conversation.
Well, you got to give it to Jimmy Carter though, because at least like his term was a mess, like over 4 years, and Joe Biden did it in just
4 months.
Record time.
Yeah.
Record time.
We need to make sure we have Ted over there at Biden's arrival because, with Biden about to put hundreds of thousands of blue collar workers out of business in the auto industry, I'm pretty sure he's going to have some kind of a warm welcome when his actually, they won't even pull up. They'll sneak him in the back door, but I'm sure there will be people waiting for him at that plant.
Right. It's not just the lockdown policies that have caused all of the problems with Michigan labor. It's the left, and they're putting the environment before American workers. And we all have a responsibility, right, to our planet to do the best that we can. But they are killing tens of thousands of jobs in the name of environmental protection. And these blue collar workers that the left has, pretended to represent for decades on end, they are fleeing in droves because they know the Democrats no longer have their best interests at heart. It's insane.
And it's not just the environment; it's environmental extremism,
Yes.
right? Like, I mean, I think most people in this room are conservationists. We all spend a lot of time on that. There is a large difference between being a protecting our environment and then these extremists that are completely political in what they're.
And one thing we haven't even talked about is, Biden's call for a $3 trillion tax hike, including the business tax rate. He wants to bring that up to 28%. That would be higher than communist China.
Some big breaking news this week, following on breaking news last week. And this is new polling numbers. I'm sure everyone has read about and heard about the Chief of Police in Detroit, James Craig, announced on Monday that he is retiring. And he did confirm that he is considering a run for governor against Gretchen Whitmer. MERS just released a poll. They got right after it. They wasted no time. And it actually shows Craig, who's got pretty low name ID outside of the Metro Detroit area, trailing Governor Whitmer by just 6 points. She's at 48, so it's under 50%, and that's very significant in this business. If an incumbent is under 50, that means they are vulnerable. Chief Craig is at 42%. Also tested in the poll is John James. He trails by 10 points, 49 to 39. Again, the governor remains under 50%, and so that is within the statistical margin of error. But I think one of the most interesting things here is that Chief Craig pulls 32% of the black vote. And as we saw with President Trump, who increased his share of the black vote, the Latino vote, and the LGBT vote, a lot of constituencies that were not traditionally Republican are moving toward the Republican column. And if Chief Craig does decide to run, it's pretty obvious from what MERS is reporting that he can make some inroads at the black community that Republicans have often struggled to make. So it's an exciting time for the party right now as we look at some really good candidates that are considering this run. Any thoughts from the table?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the bloom is off the rose as far as the governor with our Lansing Press Corps, our Capital Press Corps, which I really appreciate. I mean, at the beginning of COVID, everybody sort of gave her the benefit of the doubt, myself included. I sat at home with my kids and I was very concerned. Nobody knew what was happening. All of a sudden, people are it's like the movie Outbreak, like it's just extrapolated out, and then but the bloom is off the rose. The benefit of the doubt is waning. The fact that she continues, if not to outright lie, let's talk about operating in a very shady gray area. This poll just shows that the vast majority of Michiganders are like, I'm not so sure about this right now. And even without, putting the name to it, a governor at this point, this far out, tremendous opportunity. I know there's a lot of excitement in this building. I know there's not a lot of excitement among Republicans that this could end up being a very good year for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty easy to say at this point that Governor Whitmer's handling of the pandemic has been an objective failure. She's lied, she's hid, she's mismanaged this entire thing from the get-go, and she owns 100% of it because she decided to not work with our legislature, not work with anybody. She owns 100% of it, and she's going to answer for it in November. And anytime, again, going back to, I think, Ted, you've said it 100 times, the only science that she's used during this has been her political science. So I'm sure because of this poll, we might be opened up a little bit more come next week.
Quicker,
Some new data for it.
The CDC
some new
just
science for her.
That you don't have to wear a mask outside if you're fully vaccinated.
Or inside.
Or inside. Yes.
Masks are done.
But yet, still, like at my daughter's soccer game, and I'm sorry, you guys are probably like rolling your eyes right now. They are, for the record, they're all rolling their eyes at me, but I get very fired up about this. My daughter plays at a huge soccer complex in East Lansing. The rule is if there are 100 people or more at this entire complex, you still have to wear a mask outside. So my daughter played last weekend a game, there are maybe 14 girls on her team, 14 girls on the other team, parents, spectators, whatever. The opposite side of the complex, so probably 300 yards away, another game was going on. Between those two, it was over 100 people. We still all had to wear masks outside. Why are we still masking our children?
Crazy. It's crazy. Well,
Why were we ever?
But do the vaccinations either work or they don't? And continue to force perfectly healthy and in most cases vaccinated people to follow these policies that our leaders aren't even following is
No, you said
ridiculous.
it the best last. You said that if you want the vaccination now, there are no lines.
They're not.
Anybody who wants to be vaccinated can be fully vaccinated. So why aren't we opening up the entire state?
You can
right
walk
now?
in by Memorial Day. There's zero reason that we should not be open. We've been able for weeks now. If you want the vaccine, you can walk in and get the vaccine.
Especially now that they've opened it up for children 12 to 15.
Yep.
So in this case of youth sports, do kids who are vaccinated, are they still going to have to wear masks when they are playing
Right.
outside?
So we need to circle back to what we discussed in the beginning of this, which was Gretchen Whitmer, and what is she going to do in reaction to these polling numbers? Is she going to now gift us back some of our freedoms, hoping that everybody forgets what she's done?
We will not let them forget.
We're not going to let them
Her
forget.
big thing is she's operated this. This is manufactured fear. That's what it has been from the very beginning. They like people being scared. They like people being in fear and pretending that a bunch of people, vaccinated people, get en masse in half-empty churches and half-empty restaurants is just insanity.
Yep.
And it needs to
all
stop.
about control.
It needs to
It's
stop.
all about
Well,
control.
and as we do pull out of this nonsense, finally, one of the challenges that we're going to have moving forward, in addition to the chip challenge that we're going to have for the auto industry, which is already forcing plants to idle, nearly half the businesses in Michigan are looking for workers. Like, anywhere in the community you drive around, you're seeing help wanted signs throughout the state. And it's pretty obvious why. People are getting paid more in these unemployment benefits that were increased because of COVID. You make more staying at home than you make working.
I'm actually so grateful for the employees that we have in our small business. I've never been more grateful to these people. I look at them with a complete, because they show up every day to work and I know that they don't have to. And that's small businesses are closing. I think they said a third of all small businesses in Michigan have closed permanently and are not expected to ever reopen.
Right. And some of that is an impact of COVID and being shut down for so long and not being able to sustain it. But now, I don't know how many of you have done this. I've gone to a restaurant that now no longer serves lunch because they don't have the employees to work. Your lines at grocery stores, if you're picking something up at Lowe's, everywhere you go, jobs are available because people don't they're not going to work.
Right. Local Thai restaurant, 2 local Thai restaurants in my area. Neither of them have opened back up for in person. And I finally went in and I'm like, why aren't you? Because they just have everything blocked off. Why aren't you opening up? And she said, all of our employees left. They're not even in Michigan anymore. And so their entire business model is just changing to carry out. They don't know that they ever will.
It's the same reason that still to this day, when you go to a majority of fast food restaurants, you're only going to be able to go through the drive-through because it takes less staff to just operate the drive-through.
Yep.
This week was the first meeting, or the first 2 meetings of the Michigan Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission,
MICRC.
MICRC.
Ooh, good for you.
It's like the Mickey Mouse Clubhouse.
Yeah.
No, I'm going to
We,
say that all day. Come on.
A few of us attended the first meeting in Jackson. We got to see, I would say there's about 120 to 150 people. About 70 people spoke at I would say most of them were making arguments that I would say are very favorable to what we believe would be fair maps. Some of the things were interesting, and one thing that I heard often is people advocating that state legislative and congressional lines take into consideration parks and recreational areas. I'm not saying there's not a political reason to justify that. I'm just struggling to figure out what it is. Sarah, you were there.
It's things that are important to people.
It's the swing set lobby, man. The swing set lobby.
Swing set lobby.
I love it.
I love it.
Sarah, you were there. What were your thoughts?
I have been vehemently opposed to this process. Back to 2018 when it was on the ballot, I felt like it was smoke and mirrors. I felt like it was an attempt by the liberal left to take over the redistricting process, an unnecessary takeover because we already had checks and balances. People want to talk about gerrymandering. What's been the swing in state house seats over the past 10 years? Republicans had 63, then Dems had 68. That's not a gerrymander at any rate. I actually left that meeting feeling cautiously optimistic. I think that the vast majority of these commissioners, based on the meetings that I've watched previously, as well as attending this in-person hearing, they were engaged. They were listening to what people have to say. They're taking the responsibility very seriously. And I think what most people, and tell me if you think I'm wrong, Jason, you were there too, I would say 95% of the speakers said, pay attention to municipal lines. My community is the town in which I live. My county shares emergency services with this county. Please keep us in the same community so that we are advocating to one person who because those regions aren't going to change. Your emergency services regions aren't going to change with redistricting. So I left feeling very optimistic about, this may be actually a fair process, which was definitely a doubt in my mind.
One of the things that I found interesting about this process, and as you guys know, I was in California 10 years ago when they had their first citizens redistricting, and quite the opposite from how Michigan is approaching it. There was almost an insistence that we keep municipalities together. Communities of interest meant 2 things. One, it was cities and adjacent cities being communities of interest, and then more broadly defined by other groups and other jurisdictional lines, whether governmental or non-governmental. So it's interesting to me what in California what they were looking at is don't take a city of 100,000 people and cut it up 3 different ways to create gerrymandered districts that come outside of that. Try to keep that 100,000 person city intact. Try to keep your counties intact. They don't have townships in California, but unincorporated areas, keep those intact. Whereas here, there seems to be this motivation to not recognize those political jurisdictional lines and to instead come up with other communities of interest to define this. And one of my takeaways from the other night is, given the 16 hearings and all the other input that commissioners are receiving, I think they're going to be so overwhelmed with all these different and of varying importance, frankly, communities of interest, that they may just default to geographic and political lines that make sense. Listen, these are motivated by people looking at maps and seeing spider districts, that kind of thing. I think these folks are going to come out and want you to see compact districts that make sense, that geographically and culturally match some community lines. So we'll see how this process continues.
Well, one of the big arguments, just to expand upon that, from the Democrats have been the argument of like proportionality, right? That every district should be as 50-50 as possible. I would argue that makes almost no sense. That if you are a farmer, you do not want to be lumped in with a city because your interest is very different than somebody who lives in a downtown Grand Rapids versus a Kent County farmer. I think paying attention to those municipal lines, if I choose to live in the city, there's a certain lifestyle that I want. I want walkable, I want traffic noise, I want parks and recreation. If I'm a farmer,
you want your representation to represent your community.
I want them to share my interests.
And so if
yes,
it's
exactly.
50-50, then chances are everybody is going to be represented by somebody that only represents half of their area.
Right.
We will always be electing somebody that doesn't understand the rest of their community.
Yep.
Well, it'll be an interesting process to continue to watch unfold. As I mentioned, we have our first state committee meeting, and we thought it would be interesting for people that whether you're politically experienced and been involved with the party or just kind of a political observer, kind of how we function and what we do. When we have a state committee meeting, that is the 114 people that form our state committee. We have about 4,000 precinct delegates around the state. The precinct delegates actually run on the ballots. So you actually have to submit papers and be on the ballot and win an election in order to be a precinct delegate. And those folks are the grassroots of the party. But the state committee is made up of 114 people. So that with the executive leadership, the chairman, the co-chair, our vice chairs, we'll meet this weekend and get an update on what's going on and where things go from here. But let's talk a little bit about what is the role of the Michigan Republican Party. People think that we endorse. We don't. We endorse candidates that win Republican primaries. There's been some, obviously, saber rattling over some Republicans that voted for impeachment, for instance. Andrea, talk a little bit about like how the party functions in primaries and general elections and kind of what the obligations of the party are as an institution.
Yeah, so I think even within like our precinct delegate base, I think there's confusion on what we do. And so the Michigan Republican Party supports and elects Republicans in the general election. We are not policymakers. We don't dictate policy. We leave that to the elected legislature. Obviously, there are things that we
don't negotiate contracts for Dominion voting machines.
We do not. No.
I honestly, I've been through so many meetings in the last couple of weeks where I've had to say the same answer over and over. That's not what we do. I keep thinking of that commercial. What's the commercial with the old lady? She's got all the pictures on the wall, and she goes, "That's not how any of this works." That's really what I feel like. People don't understand what we do, and I get it because I didn't for years either.
So it's kind of funny that we talk about this, when we want to see policy from the legislature, we have the same ability to do what our grassroots do. Pick up the phone and call your representative. That's the same thing we do in here. We cannot force them to look at policy, change their votes. We can advocate why we think that they should go in a different direction or why this legislation is important, just like our grassroots can. But at the end of the day, we don't do anything with policy.
And I think if I'm understanding what you're saying, we're doing that as individuals,
yes,
not as like a state party staff,
yeah,
where this is not the chairman advocating or our co-chair Meshawn calling and saying the Michigan Republican Party demands that you do X, Y, Z. Why? Because Republicans come down on different sides of a variety of issues.
Yep. So what we do is after the August primary, which I think is going to be August 9th of 2022, if your name has an R after it on the ballot in November, we're going to work our butts off to get you elected because we truly believe that Republicans offer the best solutions and values for the people of Michigan. So we're going to put together a ground game. We're going to have a field staff here. We're going to talk to voters. We're going to go directly to where they are at their homes. We're going to make calls to them. And we're going to explain to them why Republicans offer the best future for Michigan.
And the Democrat Party want nothing more than to play up this, this divide and these divisions within our party. That's what they want us to be doing. We're playing, if we are doing that, we're playing into their hands and the permanent Washington political class. They want us fighting with each other because To them, it's a divide and conquer strategy. And if we need to be united because we know we have the better message for this country and for the American worker.
Well, and I would add to that, the divide within our party is not quite the breach that it's being portrayed. Obviously there are many, many Republicans who love President Trump and are loyal to President Trump. And there are many Republicans who might not love Donald Trump the person, but loved the policies that came out of the Trump administration. I think by any measure, the most conservative presidency that we've probably ever seen in American history. And so, it's really a pretty narrow divide. And I think when we move past that and unify on who we should be concerned about, is a Democratic Party that has morphed into a socialist party. But in order to win in Michigan, I think, there's sometimes a struggle for people to understand that we're not a red state. We are a purple state, and we were for many years a blue state. Andrea is political director. You are a data guru, and you've been working on the numbers in the state. Help people understand the Democrat tilt of Michigan and what we need to do in order to win in November 22.
Yeah, so obviously, most people know Michigan is not a party registration state. So we can't pull up and look and see how many people are registered Republicans and registered Democrats. We rely on modeling, which is a scary term. There's a lot of information that goes into that, from where people shop, where people eat, where they've pulled ballots, where they live. Working in the digital and data side of things the last couple of years has been pretty enlightening at how we're able to model, who we think someone is going to support. So when you break it down and look at the numbers, in 2020, there was a 71% turnout of voters, which is astonishing. 5.5 million people came out and voted in 2020. Previous to that, in 2018, we had about 55% turnout, so 4.2 million people. I fully anticipate that voter engagement is going to continue to stay high. And so I'm anticipating close to 4.4 million people are going to come out and vote next year in 2022. So when you look at a number like that, and you look at the modeled breakdown of that 4.4 million people, the D's already have advantage of about 250,000 voters when you look at the modeling. There's about 430,000 people in the state that we can model as truly independent and swing voters. And those voters are going to decide who our governor is next year. For Republicans to be successful, we have to win over 62% of those swing voters. Not 50, 62%. So how do we do that? That means that every single Republican in the state of Michigan has to be united and come out and vote. But we also have to message to what's important to those people. So that's our task here in this building, is figuring out how we can message that our Republican candidate offers the best future for Michigan, up and down the ballot.
And as we were talking, so people understand maybe a shorthand of that, we are a 56% Democrat state, 44% Republican. So that is a 12 percentage point advantage that Democrats start with when we go into this election, with 430,000 swing voters within those groups, that if we move those our direction, we win. Do you have any historical context you can add to that? How President Trump performed, how former Governor Snyder performed, to give people kind of an understanding of what that looks like?
Yeah, so in 2010, Rick Snyder, relative newcomer to the political world, he won about 75% of the independent vote in 2010. That number dwindled in 2014, as most incumbent numbers do. With President Trump, I don't have that number right in front of me, but the one thing President Trump was able to do is actually, even if he didn't win a majority of the swing voters, he pulled Union Democrats. He pulled labor workers. And so that's what put him over the edge here in Michigan in 2016.
And a lot of first-time voters.
Yep, absolutely.
And if we could just recapture those union and those labor workers, which I would believe are so ripe right now, considering the failings of Governor Whitmer, with or without Trump on the ticket, we need to be able to figure out how to message to those people. And I feel like that isn't going to be too difficult.
I mean, her incompetent response to the pandemic, mixed with the left's constant attacks against law enforcement, some of these issues, I think we are in a strong position to take a good percentage of voters.
But only if Republicans are united
Exactly.
and strong together and not going after each other.
Exactly.
And that's why this is so important. I know people laugh at us when we push the unity message, but it is more important than ever that we are unified going into next year, because this state will not withstand another 4 years of Gretchen Whitmer. It will not.
Mm-hmm. And we all have been on the same team, whether you voted for Trump in 12 or in 16, Mitt Romney in 12. We all got to be together to ensure victory in 22.
You know what? As soon as these candidates start coming in, I mean, we're already seeing it just with the teasing of Chief Craig. As soon as these candidates start coming in, people are going to find things to rally behind that are going to give them a common interest. And I'm looking forward to that.
Well, and candidates emerging in the statewide offices, I think, will help unify people too. I mean, in the wake of the 2020 election, the controversies around that, there wasn't really anything to focus on looking forward. We're seeing now with candidates starting to step up for statewide offices that people's focus is going to start being on 2022 and what we have to do to get Gretchen Whitmer out of office.
Well, and we like to talk a lot on this podcast about cancel culture. And Republicans, I think, as a rule, I mean, the vast majority of Americans hate cancel culture. But we have this movement of a handful of Republicans who want to cancel what they call rhinos or people who don't 100% agree with them. And it has to stop. From my perspective, I'm not going to let anybody tell me if I'm a Republican or not. That's my decision to make. I am a
And
Republican.
I'm going to assume because you're here that you are.
I went to Hillsdale College.
You're in the building.
Right.
By definition.
You're teasing me, but
Look at her. I went to Hillsdale
listen,
College.
I have three kids at home. I give my blood, sweat, and tears to this cause constantly and consistently. God help me. This is my fourth tour of duty at MIGOP. You don't do that unless you are A, a glutton for punishment, or B, a true believer. And I'm a little bit of both, let's be honest. But you know what? There's nowhere in your life where you get 100% of what you want. You don't get it in your marriage. You don't get it in your job.
My wife
I'm
does.
looking at my boss just right now. You don't get it with your children. There's no place in your life where you get 100% of what you want. Why would that be any different with your elected officials or the members of your party? Because 100% of what you want is 33% of what I want. So when we elect somebody, they have to serve all of those people. They have to make decisions and build coalitions. And I'm in the middle of John Boehner's book, and I wish I had the quote in front of me right now where he talks about you don't have to give up on your principles. We're not talking about compromise. We're talking about common ground. So we need to stop looking at things in a divisive way and find those areas of common ground and unify around those.
Well, I like your segue on cancel culture because now we can talk about the cancel of the week. Who's got a cancel of the week?
I think the cancel of the week is the governor canceling Enbridge's Line 5 and the battle that she is waging against this important pipeline here in Michigan. Not only is she telling people who live in the upper peninsula of Michigan that she doesn't care that their costs are going to skyrocket or they're not going to be able to heat their families this winter. She's decided that our peace with Canada is worth going to war over.
Who gets Canada mad? That is a true feat.
Gretchen Whitmer. Yeah.
When you're a neighboring state.
Yeah.
On Monday, the Line 5 people laid out 1,400 helmets on the lawn of the Capitol, and I had to pull over my car and get out to take a picture of it because it looked like a graveyard, and the members there were somber, and they said that's exactly what it is. Those are just the immediate jobs right now, and those are all representing a family who no longer has somebody to pay the bills, just going to go on, life support again.
And extrapolate that out to the people who work in the refineries, the people who work in neighboring states who also rely on this oil pipeline. I mean, Whitmer is canceled, again, not just for not, putting the extreme environmental policy first, because this is our best, personal opinion here, best, safest option versus rail cars transporting oil, semi trucks over the Mackinac Bridge.
But Jennifer Granholm said it best this week, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but she said pipe is the best way.
She did.
You'll be blown away.
Fuel and oil.
You'll be blown away. But this is Whitmer
We need
again.
a debate between Granholm and Whitmer.
Oh, I would pay a lot
Line
of
5.
money for that.
Yeah.
But this is once again the governor going it alone.
Yeah.
I'm governing by fiat.
Yeah.
I'm making the
Advising her.
decision. and you guys all just basically have to
And
suck it.
That's the most exhausting part of all of this is her consistently going at it alone. I mean, it is like living in a monarchy where she wakes up, barks out orders, and it's gotta stop. I mean, we have to start standing up to this in some fashion.
And there was a solution. There was a solution that the legislature and Governor Snyder worked out with Enbridge to build a tunnel that would provide safety for our beautiful Great Lakes. And as soon as Dana Nessel and Governor Whitmer got in, it was done. They canceled it right away because it was a campaign promise to the environmental extremists.
Bingo. It's all politics.
Yep.
They're caving to the environmental extremists, and she understands that she doesn't have a lot of support up there, whether it's the UP, Northern Michigan. She doesn't care about them. She
And
is not a leader. It's all politics.
They have offered zero alternative on how
That's-
to
yes.
get this,
Yeah.
this propane from point A to
Yep.
point B.
They're not solutions
Just
based.
not the pipeline.
Yep. They're not solutions based. It's a political.
We had the demonstration today on the Capitol steps that had all of the pro-pipeline environmentalists out there, and it was so fun watching Representative Joe Bellino engage them while they were on the steps. He was shouting at them, "You all came here in cars." They had no answer. He said it like 4 times. "You all drove here in a car."
And it's not just here in Michigan. I mean, look at President Biden. First day in office, was it, that he canceled the Keystone Pipeline? How many jobs did that kill? How many Michigan jobs did that kill? You know what I mean? It's just they are leaving behind the laborers in Michigan and across the country.
And again-
and those are the people that we need to be talking to.
Not just the people who are physically building the pipeline, but the restaurant owners that would service the construction workers that are doing it, the trucking companies that would haul the needed materials, the construction companies that would be building and creating the various parts and pieces of a pipeline. I mean, it's a huge snowball effect.
Well,
of
and
people who are
going back
impacted.
to what we were talking about in terms of the Democratic leanings of the state, I mean, we all saw a realignment of the traditional coalitions within the Republican and Democratic Party. And, the Democrats, I would argue they never really did represent the working class, that they just pandered to them and were more hostile to Republicans than they were pro-worker. But the Democratic Party of old, whatever it looked like, it is a completely different party today. It's an elite party. It is the party of big tech, big media, big corporations, big labor, big cities, and big government. And when you look during the year plus of COVID, who did well in those times? All those bigs. They're more profitable. They have more influence on our lives. And who suffered? It was the working class. It was the small business owner.
Yeah.
It was the entrepreneur who's got
Yeah.
the boot on their neck. And when you look at policies like this, going into 2022, we are the party of the little guy. We are the party fighting for people that are just trying to get by, make it, create jobs, take risks. And all the bigs, all the elites with their woke cancel culture dictating to us how we should live our lives and how they're better than the rest of us. They're going to have a reckoning, I think, in 2022. And this is just one example. Winner of the week, Tad, I want to give this one to you. Who's the winner of the week?
The winner of this week is the Capitol Press Corps. They are working to hold Governor Whitmer accountable. MIGOP, we've held about a half a dozen press conferences over the course of the last few months, and they've come out and they've covered what we've been exposing, and they're asking, they're pushing the governor's office on this, and we've seen it from the Free Press, the news,
MERS,
Gongwer here in Lansing,
TV stations?
TV stations. Folks they're waking up to what the governor's been doing, which is just pushing things off, deciding.
It all comes back down to transparency. I mean, this is a governor who ran on a sunshine plan that she was going to be so transparent. We're still ranked near, I think, in the bottom 10 in the country for state governments in transparency. What has been the problem with COVID? Transparency. We don't know about the nursing home data. We don't know what science she's ever used for any of the shutdown orders. And now here we are on her jumping on a private plane to go visit her father in Florida, unvaccinated, right at the time that she was telling the rest of us not to go on spring break. And Florida in particular responsible for our COVID spikes. I mean, we were told, and we all know, that if you are unvaccinated and you are visiting an elderly person with an ailment, that's the exact worst thing you could do. And that's what the governor did. And for the first week that this came out, she was getting a pass. And she was getting a pass on how it was paid for. And she lied multiple times. She lied to MERS on the podcast 3 times by my count, obfuscating what she actually did and when she did it. She said she was gone for 2 days. Ted, as you outlined in the press conference, she was gone 4 days. She left Friday morning. She returned Monday night. I mean, it is lie after lie. I thought it was interesting. I think it was in the Detroit Free Press that there was an article about public relations professionals saying, this isn't going away because she's not being transparent. And what was most notable about it is Democrats. You had former Governor Jim Blanchard's communications director quoted in the article critical of how Whitmer is handling it. Former Governor Granholm's communications director criticizing
their trickle out plan right now is just an absolute failure. And you've pointed out that our talking points have been that she lied, and we've demonstrated how she lied. And so for them to ignore it, we're not just accusing her; we've shown the lie.
And they're seeing that, and
they're
asking for more answers. And they're asking her who paid for this plane, this private, secret, unvaccinated trip to Florida. Who paid for it?
This Andrea just reminded me, in the 2018 cycle, the governor's team illegally funneled corporate money into her committee to elect using the Build a Better Michigan. I don't know if you all remember this. It was a passion project of mine. It infuriated me. She was found guilty of doing such a thing. Andrea and I are just thinking, I wonder if this Build a Better Michigan PAC is still around, if it's been repurposed, and maybe that's where the money came from to pay for this plane.
Well, all of this is why Governor Whitmer is the loser of the week. And frankly, she's been losing for about 2 weeks. And I think obviously with the dishonesty and the lack of transparency on this trip, I was talking with some reporters the other day about this. How could this have been paid for? And there's, I think, 3 or 4 different ways it could be paid for. And she's disqualified some of those. One would be taxpayer. She has already said on the record it was not paid for by taxpayers.
Although we still don't know if state police came with her, which would have come at taxpayer expense.
Still don't know that. She also said it was a personal trip, which would, I guess, now obligate her to personally paying for it. Did she personally pay for it? The third way would be a 527 there for state officials. If there are expenses that you incur in the course of executing the responsibilities of your office that are not covered by your taxpayer-funded budget, you can raise money from supporters into a 527 account and use that. But if there was no official business, there's no justification to use it. She said it was a personal trip, so she can't use that. The other way would be an in-kind contribution to her campaign fund that probably exceeds, unless a couple did it and it was personal, not corporate.
Although didn't she say this was not a gift?
It was not a gift, but it was also a personal trip. There would have to have been some campaign activity involved. And
and here's hoping if it was not a personal trip, if there was some official business that would allow for this 527 to pay for, there's a whole other group of questions about why she didn't notify the governor of Florida that she was attending, which is just standard practice.
The story is not over.
It is not. And, she's made it drag out.
So thank you.
Thank you,
Governor Whitmer.
Governor Whitmer, the gift that keeps on giving.
Keep up the great work, Governor. Well, I think unless you guys have anything else, that is good for this week. Thanks for those of you listening. Have a great weekend, and you'll hear from us next week.
People suck, people suck, people suck.